I am Marla, 32 years old, and just yesterday, the modest home I fought so hard to buy without family help became the center of a lawsuit when my entitled parents demanded ownership, turning my pride into humiliation. The quaint two-bedroom bungalow on Willow Street, with its cheerful yellow shutters, represented everything I'd quietly built for myself after years of invisibility. Yet suddenly, it stood not as a monument of independence, but as the latest battlefield where my parents' greed collided head-on with my self-worth. I'd always felt out of sync with the rest of the Hudson family. My older sister Kendra was their golden child, shiny, polished, with a job in finance and a husband, Chad, whose trust fund had conveniently elevated the family's social standing. Meanwhile, my quieter accomplishments, graduating debt-free, consistently climbing the ranks at my tech firm, living responsibly, were dismissed as mere details rather than achievements. But nothing I'd done, not even this house, seemed to earn me genuine respect. Yesterday's summons, heavy with legal threats, was yet another reminder. In their eyes, independence was defiance, success without their oversight, an insult. My mother, Leslie, and father, Arthur, insisted I owed them simply for existing. "We raised you, Marla. You wouldn't even have a paycheck if it weren't for our sacrifices." My mother snapped bitterly, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. The bitterness was palpable, entitlement dripped from their words, thickening the air with a suffocating tension. "You can't be serious," I'd responded, disbelief choking my voice. "We'll see you in court," my father had spat back, each word a carefully aimed dagger. My heart raced, recalling that ugly confrontation, but before I tell you how I stood my ground and faced their betrayal head-on, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever overcome something for your family, because you have no idea what they'll do once their claim on your life is threatened. Yet, something unexpected stirred within me in that very moment of attack. I felt neither despair nor defeat. Instead, clarity surged through me like an electric current, stripping away years of conditioned obedience. My refusal to surrender my home would trigger consequences far beyond a courtroom, and finally allow me to reclaim a narrative that had never truly been mine. My family's tendency to ignore my successes started long before I bought my house. The memories flashed vividly as I stood staring at the stack of legal documents on my kitchen table, my fingers trembling slightly. Each sheet felt like another reminder of the many times I'd been pushed aside, invisible despite my best efforts. I could still recall my college graduation day. My cap and gown neatly pressed, excitement bubbling in my chest as I waited for my family to show up. I'd scanned the crowd, hopeful and expectant, but neither Mom nor Dad appeared. Instead, a text had pinged on my phone. "Something came up at work, sorry honey, we'll celebrate another time." We never did. The memory was bitter, but what stung even worse was that just 2 years later, they'd thrown a lavish celebration for Kendra's engagement at a fancy venue overlooking the bay. Dad had toasted his brilliant daughter and new son, Chad, his voice swelling with pride. I'd sat quietly in the corner, sipping lukewarm champagne, watching as the entire room praised their accomplishment of joining two prominent families. When I'd earned my first promotion at the tech company, a job I'd worked tirelessly to land, I'd eagerly shared the news, hoping this might finally gain their attention. Mom had barely glanced up from her tablet, murmuring, "That's nice, dear," while Dad quickly changed the subject back to Kendra's impending wedding arrangements. Even my career advancements, achievements hard-won through late nights and relentless dedication, remained invisible behind the glossy, effortless glow that Kendra exuded. Kendra herself wasn't openly malicious. It was worse. She genuinely believed everything came easier because she made the right choices. Whenever we spoke, her subtle digs were disguised as friendly advice, condescendingly reminding me that being single at 32 was brave, or cautioning that owning such a small house would mean settling forever. Last Christmas, seated awkwardly on their expensive leather couch, I'd overheard Mom quietly telling Aunt Maureen, "Marla just never quite lived up to her potential. It's such a shame." The casual cruelty of it was crushing, the dismissal complete and absolute. My voice never mattered in our family chorus, I was merely background noise. Yet as I glanced at the lawsuit again, something hardened within me. Years of invisibility, of dismissal, hadn't weakened me as they'd intended. It had forged my quiet resilience, turning my silence into something stronger, deeper, and more unbreakable than they could ever comprehend. I kept my greatest accomplishment carefully hidden from them, building it brick by brick, in secret. The thought first took shape on a rainy Sunday afternoon 3 years earlier, as I sat curled up on my worn-out sofa, scrolling aimlessly through home listings online. I'd grown tired of renting, tired of landlords raising my rent on a whim. I wanted something permanent, something stable that couldn't be stripped away from me. But every listing seemed far beyond my grasp. Then came my aha moment. It wasn't just about buying a house, it was about claiming independence, my own space away from the shadow of my family's relentless judgment. Something entirely mine. My resolve hardened, becoming a promise to myself. I buckled down harder than ever, picking up extra freelance coding gigs, squeezing every ounce of productivity out of my waking hours. I said no to evenings out with friends, dinners, trips, all luxuries pushed aside for the vision of homeownership. For 2 years, I watched every penny. Every grocery bill, every cup of coffee, every late-night snack was weighed against that singular goal. The nights were hardest. Alone in my tiny drafty apartment, surrounded by empty takeout containers and discarded notes, exhaustion sometimes brought me to tears. I'd wipe them quickly away, reminding myself why I was doing this. To break free from a cycle where I was always last, always disposable. When the moment finally arrived, and the realtor handed me the keys to my very own house, the rush of triumph was overwhelming. I'd done it. Me, Marla Hudson. No help, no loans from family, no strings attached. The sense of pride was intoxicating, the fulfillment so profound, it left me dizzy. But even in my joy, I kept it quiet. I knew my family too well, their reactions predictable, their criticisms sharp, so I moved quietly, unpacking each box with a careful reverence. I painted walls, hung pictures, built furniture, carefully crafting each room into a reflection of myself. It was simple, but it was mine, completely and absolutely. As months passed, my quiet accomplishment began to settle comfortably around me, a shield against their dismissive glances and veiled judgments. I learned the comforting sounds of my home's settling wood, the subtle hum of pipes in winter, the rustle of leaves through open windows in autumn. Each small detail was proof that I'd created something meaningful. But now, staring at the lawsuit that threatened to steal it all, anger ignited within me. This wasn't just about property, it was about control, entitlement, and my parents' refusal to accept that I'd outgrown their influence. I would fight, because no one, not even family, could claim ownership over the quiet strength I'd finally built for myself. Today was supposed to be different. It should have been a day of excitement, anticipation, my career's biggest deal finally on the verge of completion. But instead, anxiety knotted in my chest as I glanced at the clock, dreading tonight's annual family dinner. A tradition so toxic it felt less like gathering and more like trial by fire. The yearly event was always held at my parents' sprawling home, tasteful, impressive, and perfectly staged. Every guest handpicked, each conversation orchestrated to reflect favorably on Mom and Dad's carefully maintained image. And of course, to highlight Kendra's glowing accomplishments. It was a twisted kind of theater. Everyone had a role, and mine was always the supporting character, invisible and easily forgotten. I stood in front of my closet, fingers brushing nervously over clothes I rarely wore, aware of my heartbeat quickening. It was absurd, really, how this family dinner, a simple evening gathering, had become the focal point of my dread. Yet tonight felt especially sinister. Tonight was different. I'd already felt their fury, their demands etched into legal documents that lay waiting ominously downstairs. My phone buzzed softly, interrupting my anxious thoughts. A text from my friend Bonnie. "You've got this, Mar. Remember, you don't owe them anything." I smiled faintly, her encouragement a small balm against the storm brewing inside me. She was right. I owed them nothing. Yet old habits, old fears, lingered stubbornly. My stomach churned with memories of past dinners, of cutting remarks disguised as compliments, of pitying glances from neighbors who silently agreed with Mom's whispered criticisms. Poor Marla. If only she'd applied herself. Tonight, those whispers would become shouts. They wouldn't just question my decisions, they'd openly challenge my independence, my right to own something without their permission or input. The house had become their obsession, an affront to their authority. I defied the unspoken family rule. Nothing should ever be achieved without their approval. I drew in a shaky breath, pulling a navy blue sweater from the hanger, understated enough to avoid unnecessary attention, yet still professional. Sliding it over my head, I steadied my resolve. My success, my choices, my home, they were mine alone. Tonight's dinner wouldn't just be another act in their play, it would be the final scene in an era of submission. I'd face them calmly, hold my ground, and finally claim the narrative that belonged to me. Grabbing my keys and phone, I glanced one last time at the clock, taking comfort in knowing that tomorrow, at least professionally, would bring a victory they couldn't touch. Tonight, however, I'd face them, not as the overlooked daughter they expected, but as the woman I'd quietly become, someone stronger than they'd ever imagined. Pulling into my parents' perfectly manicured driveway, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. The sprawling, ivy-covered facade of their house loomed like a judgmental observer, a silent reminder of my lifelong status as an outsider. As I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my heels, I steeled myself against the evening's inevitable passive-aggressive gauntlet. Inside, the atmosphere was deceptively warm, scented with the comforting aroma of roasted chicken and herbs. Voices murmured softly from the dining room, punctuated by bursts of polite laughter. I hesitated briefly at the threshold, gathering my courage before stepping into the lion's den. "There you are, Marla, late again, I see," Mom greeted me, eyes sharp despite her polite smile. "Traffic," I responded lightly, ignoring her subtle jab as I approached the group. My sister Kendra, elegant as always in silk and pearls, gave a practiced smile. Chad nodded politely, distant as ever. Dad barely glanced up from his conversation with their neighbor, Trudy, whose perpetual gossip was sharper than the Chardonnay in her hand. Dinner began as I anticipated, questions cloaked in faux concern, each inquiry carefully veiled criticism. "So, still at the tech company?" Trudy asked casually, her gaze assessing me like merchandise. "You must find it quite exhausting, all those hours with no family of your own to care for." "Yes, it's rewarding work," I replied calmly, resisting the impulse to snap back. "Oh, Marla prefers independence," Kendra interjected smoothly. "Though I can't imagine choosing work over family, it seems so lonely." I forced a smile, bitterness pooling behind my teeth. Each exchange chipped away at my carefully built armor, but I refused to let it show. "How's that little house of yours?" Mom asked suddenly, her voice dripping condescension. "Must be hard managing it all by yourself, such a responsibility." "It's going fine," I said simply, unwilling to offer any ammunition. But Dad leaned forward, eyes cold and calculating. "Funny, we recently heard differently," he remarked, voice low enough to send chills down my spine. "Seems there's some confusion over ownership." Silence settled like ice around the table. Every eye now focused sharply on me, their curiosity no longer polite but openly hostile. My stomach knotted tightly. So this was their move, public humiliation, disguised as family concern. My home, my proudest accomplishment, reduced to a tool of shame. Yet, beneath the embarrassment, beneath the anger rising hot and fierce, determination sparked anew. They thought this would break me. They thought embarrassment would weaken my resolve. They were wrong. Tonight wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of their realization that my quiet strength was not weakness but resilience. Whatever storm they intended to unleash tonight, I was ready to weather it. The silence at the table sharpened, stretching out until it was unbearable. I felt every set of eyes fixed upon me, scrutinizing my reaction to Dad's deliberately ambiguous threat. The whispers of my family's neighbors, Trudy's intrigued smirk, my sister's carefully composed expression, it all tightened around me like a noose. "Arthur," Mom spoke softly, her voice carefully calculated for maximum sympathy, "I think Marla should understand clearly what we're talking about." Dad nodded, his gaze unwavering, his voice flat with cruel formality. "Marla, your mother and I have come to a difficult decision. We believe you've unfairly taken advantage of our generosity over the years. It's clear you don't appreciate the sacrifices we made raising you, supporting your education, and..." "Sacrifices?" My voice trembled, raw disbelief bubbling to the surface despite my desperate attempts to stay composed. "You haven't supported me in years. Everything I've built, I've done alone." "Exactly the problem," Dad cut in sharply. You've chosen to cut us out, yet claim the benefits of our family name. We believe that house rightfully belongs within the family, legally, morally. He paused, then announced coldly, "As of tonight, consider yourself formally disowned. We'll settle ownership in court." My pulse roared in my ears, the room fading slightly as the impact of his words struck me like a physical blow. Disowned. The word echoed cruelly in the stunned quiet. Kendra gasped softly, though I knew her surprise was more about the spectacle than genuine empathy. Chad looked faintly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, while Trudy, eyes gleaming, absorbed every scandalous detail. I fought desperately against the hot sting of tears, refusing to let them witness my devastation. The humiliation was suffocating, yet beneath it rage began to ignite, a fierce, burning clarity that surged upward, refusing to be suppressed. "How dare you?" My voice was low, controlled, yet crackling with intensity. "You have no right, no claim to something I earned completely on my own." "Marla," Mom interjected, feigning gentle concern. "This isn't personal." "Isn't personal?" Anger strengthened my voice, cutting her off. "You make everything personal. You punish me because I dared to build a life without needing your approval." Dad's expression darkened, his voice ice cold. "We'll see what the court has to say about that." The finality of his words shattered something fragile inside me, but also unleashed something powerful. If this was their version of family, I wanted no part of it. I stood abruptly, pushing my chair back sharply. Every eye followed my movements, startled and scandalized. "Then we'll let the court decide," I declared firmly. "But understand this. Whatever the outcome, you have no power over me anymore." Turning on my heel, I walked away, each step reinforcing my resolve. They'd tried to break me, humiliate me, but instead they'd unknowingly handed me freedom. Tonight marked the end of their control, and the start of my true independence. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but the humiliation still burned fiercely beneath my skin. I paused at the end of their driveway, desperately willing my shaking hands to steady themselves. Tears welled stubbornly, blurring my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. They'd already seen enough vulnerability tonight. Just as I took a deep, ragged breath, feeling utterly alone and shattered, my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I fumbled it out, barely glancing at the caller ID as I pressed it to my ear. "Hello?" My voice trembled, betraying the turmoil I'd tried so hard to conceal. "Marla, it's Jonathan from Legal Tech Ventures," came the excited voice, familiar yet strangely surreal amid my current chaos. "Sorry to call so late, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow." My heart skipped wildly, hope suddenly flickering within me like a candle relit. Jonathan was my main contact from a venture capital group I'd spent months quietly courting. We'd been deep in negotiations for a groundbreaking deal, one I'd barely dared to hope for. "Marla," Jonathan continued, voice charged with barely contained enthusiasm, "the partners approved the acquisition tonight. It's official. We're buying your software. Your innovation will become our new flagship product. It's an incredible deal, well into 7 figures. Congratulations, you've earned every penny." His words echoed in my ears, stunning me into silence. 7 figures. A life-changing success. And at the exact moment I'd been cut off by my own family. "Marla, you there?" Jonathan asked gently, noticing my prolonged silence. "Yes, I'm here," I finally managed, emotion thickening my voice. "Thank you, Jonathan. You have no idea how much this means to me." "I think I do," he replied warmly. "You've worked quietly, tirelessly to get here. You deserve every success. Take tonight to celebrate." As the call ended, I stood frozen, phone clutched tightly in my hand. A laugh bubbled up unexpectedly, surprising me with its strength, its pure release. Irony had never tasted sweeter. My family, so desperate to shame and control me, had chosen the precise moment of their greatest cruelty to unleash my greatest triumph. I turned, briefly glancing back toward the house, the glow of lights behind curtained windows. They were still inside, likely congratulating themselves on teaching me a harsh lesson, never imagining that the true lesson was theirs to learn. Their rejection no longer defined me. Tonight's humiliation had birthed something infinitely stronger within me, confidence and clarity they could never take away. Sliding into my car, I started the engine, warmth flooding my chest, eclipsing the ache of their betrayal. Tonight wasn't about losing family. It was about discovering who I truly was, someone who'd just achieved something incredible, entirely on my own terms. My phone had barely cooled from Jonathan's life-changing call when it began vibrating insistently again. This time the screen flashed Mom's name. My jaw tightened, fingers hovering hesitantly before finally pressing ignore. But within seconds it buzzed once more. This time Dad. Then Kendra. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly, shaking my head. Predictable, really. My family had spent decades ignoring me, dismissing my quiet victories. Yet, as soon as news of my success reached their eager ears, they couldn't wait to reclaim their long-forgotten daughter. I reached my driveway, relief flooding through me at the comforting sight of my home, standing firm and welcoming against the darkness. The cozy porch light cast a soft glow, illuminating the front door I'd painted myself. I paused, soaking in the gentle quiet, grounding myself before the storm I knew was coming. My phone continued buzzing, texts now, each more desperate and falsely contrite than the last. "Marla, sweetheart, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Call us immediately," from Mom. Then Dad's more direct, entitled demand. "We need to discuss your new situation. It affects us all." Kendra's message came last, wrapped in false sisterly warmth. "Marla, I'm sure you're upset, but don't throw away family. Call me." Family. The word sat heavily in my mind, twisted and hollowed by hypocrisy. They hadn't called me family when they publicly disowned me, humiliated me at their table, or announced their lawsuit in front of an audience hungry for scandal. Anger tightened my chest again, this time hot and fierce, fueled by years of suppressed resentment finally surfacing in powerful waves. My quiet nature had always been mistaken for weakness, my patience misread as compliance. But tonight, they'd crossed a line, one that I would never again allow to blur. Decisively, I tapped a brief reply into the family group chat. "There's no misunderstanding. You chose status over love, control over respect. You don't get to pick and choose family when it's convenient. I built my success despite your attempts to break me, not because of your support. Consider this my final goodbye." My finger hovered over the send button for only a heartbeat before pressing it firmly. A sense of relief washed over me, as cleansing and invigorating as a cool breeze after a stifling storm. Inside, silence enveloped me, comforting rather than lonely. This home, this life was mine. Not because of their name or their supposed generosity, but because of my sacrifices, my efforts, and my unwavering determination. Tonight marked the end of their manipulative games. Tomorrow would be the first day in a future I controlled, a narrative I shaped. I exhaled deeply, feeling genuinely free for the first time in my life. In stark contrast to the icy bitterness of my parents' dinner table, the next evening brought warmth, laughter, and genuine celebration at Bonnie's cozy home. As soon as she opened the door, pulling me into a hug so fierce I felt tears prickle behind my eyes, I realized something deeply true. Family wasn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, trust, and love freely given. The living room buzzed with familiar voices. Bonnie, my anchor, Jess, who'd supported me through late-night project deadlines, and even Benny, whose blunt honesty always kept me grounded. They greeted me with smiles so genuine, it thawed whatever residual chill still lingered from the previous night's betrayal. Bonnie lifted a glass in the air, eyes shining with pride. "To Marla, the strongest, most resilient friend we have, who just casually made herself a millionaire. And more importantly, did it entirely on her own terms." They cheered, the sound enveloping me like a protective shield, soothing and restoring my bruised spirit. We settled onto sofas, the conversation quickly turning spirited as laughter chased away my lingering pain. Benny jokingly volunteered to be my personal bodyguard, theatrically flexing muscles he didn't quite have, and Jess already began plotting how to decorate my home office once the deal was finalized. Their excitement was contagious, their belief in me unwavering. I shared the details of the previous night's confrontation, feeling strangely empowered by recounting it aloud. When I reached the part about my family's sudden shift, their attempts to reclaim me, Jess scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Classic emotional blackmail," she declared, shaking her head. "They don't deserve an ounce of your forgiveness." Bonnie nodded thoughtfully, her gaze gentle yet firm. "You're finally seeing clearly, Marla. They were always about control, never love. Family should lift you up, not tear you down to keep you manageable." Her words resonated deeply, sinking into places I'd previously allowed to remain buried under guilt and obligation. Here, surrounded by friends who genuinely celebrated my success, the weight of years spent chasing elusive approval finally lifted. Jess topped off my glass, nudging me playfully. Now, the real question. When are we celebrating in your house? I mean, if your parents ever let you keep it. I smiled softly, shaking my head. Trust me, they won't win this. But even if they somehow do, they can't touch what I've truly built. Bonnie squeezed my hand gently. Exactly, the house is just walls, Marla. You're the one who makes it a home. That night, surrounded by laughter and friendship, I discovered something precious. My true family wasn't the one I'd been born into, but the one I'd chosen. The people who saw my worth clearly and loved me without conditions. In the days following, my phone rarely stopped buzzing. Each call, each message from my family carried the unmistakable tone of desperation. Pleas mixed with threats, apologies laced with thinly veiled manipulation. But something had shifted within me. Their words no longer held power. The boundaries they'd crossed had forged walls that now protected me instead. The first meeting with my attorney, Elise, was illuminating. Seated calmly in her tidy, sunlit office, she dissected the lawsuit meticulously. Frankly, Marla, she said, leafing casually through the pages, this claim is absurd. Legally, morally, they have nothing. She leaned forward, eyes serious yet reassuring. Your parents count on intimidation, control through emotional leverage, will demonstrate clearly to the judge that their claims are baseless. But even more importantly, will establish boundaries they can't ignore. Boundaries, the word resonated strongly within me. My family had never respected them, never even acknowledged their necessity. My life had always felt open to their judgment, their whims, their constant interference. Now reclaiming control meant defining clearly where they ended and I began. With Elise's guidance, I outlined precisely what I would accept and, more importantly, what I would not. No direct communication outside formal legal channels, no contact unless genuinely respectful, and absolutely no access to my personal life or accomplishments, unless expressly invited. It was difficult at first, turning away from lifelong conditioning that urged compliance, politeness, and surrender. But each boundary established felt empowering, like bricks carefully laid, strengthening the fortress protecting my independence. I was tested almost immediately. Mom appeared unexpectedly at my door one afternoon, her smile tight and eyes overly bright with forced cheerfulness. Marla, can't we at least talk? I stood firmly at the threshold, heart pounding, but my voice steady. There's nothing left to say unless you're ready to sincerely apologize and respect my choices. She hesitated, mouth opening to argue, but my gaze held firm. Finally she stepped back, expression faltering slightly. You're making a mistake, she muttered weakly, turning away. No, I replied quietly, closing the door behind her retreating figure. I'm finally correcting one. Each boundary reinforced my resolve, creating a safe space around me where anxiety no longer reigned. Gradually, I found myself breathing easier, sleeping better, standing taller. Friends like Bonnie and Jess cheered each small victory, reminding me daily of my strength, my worth. The peace I felt wasn't born from vindictiveness but clarity, recognition of my right to live without constant scrutiny, judgment, or control. Each brick laid wasn't just a wall, it was proof of self-respect, tangible and solid. As I stood in my quiet, protected home that evening, I knew clearly. These boundaries weren't temporary defenses. They were permanent reminders that I'd finally reclaimed my life. As weeks turned into months, my victory in court was swift, decisive, and quietly triumphant. My parents' lawsuit unraveled spectacularly under scrutiny, their claim evaporating under the weight of evidence I'd meticulously documented. Every penny I'd earned, every sacrifice I'd made to secure my home independently. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. My home belonged solely to me. But I didn't celebrate this victory with bitterness or triumph over them. Instead, it became an opportunity to transform my pain into purpose. The hurt they'd inflicted had carved something deeper within me, a desire to ensure others never had to endure the manipulation I'd experienced. With newfound financial freedom, I launched the Safe Haven Initiative, a program aimed at helping young adults facing exploitation or manipulation by family members. Its mission was straightforward yet powerful: provide financial education, legal resources, and mentorship to empower others to reclaim their lives. The day of the initiative's launch, Bonnie, Jess, and Benny stood by my side, beaming proudly. Cameras flashed softly in the modest conference room we'd rented as journalists scribbled notes. Yet amid the gentle chaos, I felt surprisingly calm, deeply fulfilled. My pain had not broken me. Instead, I'd reshaped it into something profoundly meaningful. When I stepped forward to speak, my voice rang steady, strong. This initiative was born from personal experience. Family should be about love, support, trust, not control or manipulation. For too many, family is a source of pain rather than strength. Today we change that narrative. We provide a safe haven for those who feel trapped, exploited, or unseen. Later, mingling quietly, a young woman named Holly approached me hesitantly. She couldn't have been older than 25, her eyes nervous but hopeful. "Marla," she began softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize anyone else went through something similar. I felt so alone." My heart squeezed gently, recognizing her struggle all too well. "You're not alone, Holly, and you never will be again." That evening, reflecting alone in my cozy, peaceful living room, I glanced around my home, a home I'd fought fiercely to keep. Each room held memories of struggle and determination, yet now also echoed with new purpose. My parents had tried to erase me from our family narrative, but in doing so, they'd unknowingly freed me to create a legacy far more meaningful than theirs. For the first time in my life, the Hudson name felt genuinely mine, reclaimed, rebuilt, transformed. No longer burdened by shame or humiliation, it represented strength, compassion, and genuine empowerment. My family's betrayal had led to liberation, not just for me, but for countless others I'd now help. The quiet strength that had carried me through years of invisibility was now shining clearly, brilliantly, as I reclaimed a legacy built entirely on my terms. Sitting quietly on my porch one crisp autumn evening, watching leaves drift gently onto the lawn, I felt a deep sense of peace settle within me. The past months had reshaped not just my life, but how I saw myself. I'd spent years seeking validation from people who'd made it clear they would never willingly offer it, yet in the process of losing their approval, I finally learned to validate myself. My family's absence no longer stung, it simply felt like an old ache healed over, remembered, but no longer painful. Instead, my thoughts turned to those who'd stepped forward. Bonnie's unwavering support, Jess's enthusiasm, Benny's steadfast honesty. My chosen family had proven far stronger, far kinder, than the biological bonds I'd been born into. I sipped tea slowly, savoring the warmth against the chill of twilight, grateful for the serenity I'd fought so hard to attain. My phone buzzed softly, a message from Holly, sharing news of her latest success, achieved independently and confidently. Her victories felt as meaningful as my own, proof that my purpose was unfolding beautifully. Reflecting deeply, I realized the true essence of my struggle hadn't been the house or even the lawsuit. Those were merely symbols of something much deeper. The battle to claim ownership over my identity, my value, my story. My home stood as a monument, not of conflict but resilience. The lawsuit, an event now receding gently into the past, had inadvertently taught me the most valuable lesson of all. My worth was inherent, internal, and entirely within my control. I no longer defined success through external approval. No validation could match the strength of self-respect I'd discovered, cultivated, and fiercely guarded. For the first time, I genuinely understood that peace wasn't something others could grant or withhold, it was something I gave myself. My parents' betrayal had once seemed catastrophic, their rejection devastating. But in reality their cruelty had freed me, breaking chains I'd never realized bound me so tightly. Their attempt to humiliate me had instead revealed my true strength, igniting a fierce independence that now illuminated my path forward. As darkness deepened gently around me, I took a deep breath, feeling utterly at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new triumphs, but I now knew, without question, that I could face them with quiet strength and unwavering self-worth. The narrative was finally fully mine to write. Have you ever found yourself chasing approval from those who will never truly see your worth? I shared my story because I know I'm not alone. Too many of us quietly endure toxic relationships, struggling for validation that's never truly offered. But here's the truth. Real validation doesn't come from outside. It comes from recognizing your own strength, your own courage, your own resilience. I encourage you to share your experiences in the comments below. Tell me about a time you overcame a toxic relationship or reclaimed your story. Every story shared helps someone else feel less alone, reminding us all of our incredible capacity to define our own worth. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You never know whose life you might change by simply reaching out with compassion and honesty. Remember this: your story is yours alone, and no one else has the power to define your worth or dictate your future. Whether the betrayal comes from family, friends, or elsewhere, the strength to overcome it always comes from within. You're stronger than you know, more resilient than you imagine, and entirely deserving of the peace that comes from living authentically. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Until next time, keep reclaiming your story and rewriting your future.